Ya Ali Madad. Uh, for this Saturday evening reflections at ITREB UK, we have Professor Ali Asani with us. Professor Asani is a Murray A. Albertson Professor of Middle Eastern Studies and Professor of Indo-Muslim and Islamic Religions and Cultures. Professor Asani has his expert area of studies within the Shia and Sufi devotional traditions, especially in South Asia and even beyond. Professor Asani has been recently appointed as the Board of Governors of the Institute of Somali Studies as well. It's our honor to welcome tonight Professor Asani with us. Today, we will be talking about remembering and forgetting. And we would like Professor Asani to share some of his thoughts about this topic in light of the current situation that we all are encountering and going through together. So, Professor Asani, my first question to you would be, why this idea of remembering and forgetting is important for you?
Thank you for that question, Fahim. When I think about remembering and forgetting in the context of Islam and our tradition, I think about specifically an incident that happened a couple of years ago when I was teaching a class on Islam at Harvard. And I'd asked the students to do an assignment in which they had to read some Quranic verses and then come to class and describe how they thought God appeared in the Quran, their perceptions of God as God appeared in the Quran. And during the class discussion, one student came up with this idea that God in the Quran is actually a hurt God. He's a God who feels pain and betrayal. And this led to a whole conversation about why is God represented, in the Quran, because the Quran is supposed to be God's word, it's God speaking, but why God is representing himself as, as somebody who's been forgotten. And this, gave rise to this idea that this theme of forgetting is a very important theme in the Islamic tradition, because the Quran itself, for example, is called zikr. One of its names is a dhikr, which means the remembrance or the reminder, so that the text itself is seen as a reminder from a forgetful God, a reminder to human beings from a God who has been forgotten, to humans, that haven't you forgotten something? Haven't you forgotten me? And I feel very hurt that you've forgotten me, especially given all the mercies and bounties that have been given to you, and also that you see the signs of God everywhere around you. Where's the appreciation? Where's the gratitude? And instead, people have become egotistical and self-centered, and they think that that they're all powerful, and they've forgotten their obligations to the Creator.
That is quite inspiring. I think you have set a wonderful frame for us to navigate it further. So, Professor Asani, how would you say this theme of remembrance feature out in the Quran? How does it appear, and where does it feature in?
Yeah. So I think one historically an interesting way this thing about remembrance comes into the Quran is when we think about the revelation of the Quran itself, when the Prophet Muhammad, was meditating in a cave and he heard this voice, Iqra bismi rabbika. That experience, as it's described in the Quran, was a very powerful experience, one that inspired awe in the Prophet, but also, that he was encountering something, he was experiencing something that he never had before. He felt he was almost suffocating, or something had embraced him. He could hardly breathe, and it was scary. And the story goes that he fled the cave and he came home, and where he explained to Khadija what he had experienced, and she tried to comfort him. And then when he started receiving all these subsequent revelations, what was very interesting is that people found what he was revealing to be so beautiful that they would weep and cry. And it was as if they were connecting to something that was beyond themselves. And the beauty of the recitation itself, made people wonder, what exactly is this? What is the nature of this text that the Prophet is reciting? Why is it so powerful? Why does it create this visceral reaction within us? What is it about this text? And some people, of course, accused the Prophet of being a magician or a poet. And he said, no, I'm not a magician, I'm not a poet, I'm a prophet. And that what I am reciting actually is a revelation from the one transcendent God. And when they asked him, well, prove it, that it is in fact from the one transcendent God, he said, that in the Quranic verses that actually talk about this, that the beauty of the text is in fact the proof of its divine origin, the aesthetics and the beauty and the way it causes, there's a Quranic verse that said it causes the skin to shiver, like you get goosebumps, and it causes the heart to melt. So the Quran itself recognizes that there's something about the beauty of the text that connects deeply with the person's heart, if you will, and can become very transformative in an experiential sense. Hence the weeping and crying, and people also saying listening to Quran brings you a lot of peace. And I think these experiences are actually pointing out in another way in which that the text helps us to connect with that has been forgotten. Because when you experience the text, the experience itself arouses primordial memories. So people would say that these, that human beings, were connected to God in primordial times at the beginning, and all creatures were part of one with God, and then through creation we become separated, and we've forgotten this link with God. And this recitation, the aesthetic part of it, becomes a very powerful reminder on how we can connect with God in a way, the forgotten God, in a way that transcends the intellect, and it's very personal and intimate. So I would say that's one way in which the Quran actually connects us through its aesthetics with something that is beyond time and space, and something that we have forgotten about or we become negligent about.
That's wonderful. I think, and even your reminder that there is an aesthetic beauty and there is an element of experience in the text reminds me of this idea of tajweed and how the recitations that we hear around has also an impact within the wider Muslim community, but within for us as a person and a believer as well. But moving on, I think, do you have any other examples or any other thoughts about how remembrance features in the sources in general?
Yeah. Well, I think in the Quran in particular, zikr is mentioned as a term. And zikr, of course, means remembrance. And it appears, as many times, or if not more, than salat. We usually talk about salat as the formal ritual prayer, but zikr is mentioned over and over again as a way of connecting with God. So there are many Quranic verses that talk about zikr. So for instance, there's in the second surah, verse 152, there's God tells us, remember me and I will remember you. Or there's another surah 73, verse 8, remember the name of your Lord and devote yourself to him. And then you have another Quranic surah that that talks about, and this is chapter 13, verse 38, which talks about how remembering God, remembrance of God brings peace in our heart. And so you have this, over and over again, you have this mention of zikr. And I said, it's really seen, if you think about prayer generally as a way in which we connect with God, something that connects you with God, it's very clear in the Quran that you have this salat, the formal ritual prayer, but zikr is equally, if I would not say maybe even more important in the Quran, being God conscious, remembering God all the time is a theme that you find over and over again in the Quran. And of course, it's contrasted with the theme of people forgetting God. And so remembrance that way, but also remembering God through the signs of nature. Because there is this, again, Quranic verses that talk about, can you not see in nature the sunrise and the sunset and the changes of seasons, or contemplate, the bee and how it makes honey and all of this, that around us are the signs of God, but we somehow don't read them as signs, but they're reminders of God everywhere in our lives. As an important sort of teaching in the Quran is that everywhere you turn is the face of God. So God surrounds us, but we are so negligent that we don't even see the God, quote unquote, see or experience the God that surrounds us. So that's a theme. And I think the other interesting theme that you find in the Quran connecting with remembrance is this notion of the beautiful names of God, Asma al-Husna. And these are, of course, we know these as 99 names of God. And when you remember someone or something, you have to, remember that whatever you're remembering, the object, through a name. And in the Quran, we have these names of God, Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, and so on and so forth. And so chanting the names of God, remembering God by these different names becomes an important practice, an important way in which you remember God. And it's also said that one of these names is the Ism Azam, the greatest name. And this idea becomes very important again, because the Ism Azam, or the greatest name, is a way in which each individual can connect with God and sort of decrease the distance or the abyss of that separates human from the divine, or separates us from experiencing God. And this Ism Azam, as people will realize, is actually a very central term to esoteric traditions in Islam, because how do we connect to God? Especially in esoteric traditions of Islam, you have the Sufi sheikh or the pir, or in our case, the imam gives us Ism Azam. So Ism Azam is a very important way in many esoteric traditions in how one can connect with God through remembering the Ism Azam. And of course, the Ism Azam is then seen as a very powerful tool which you remember and you focus on and you concentrate on, and which helps you draw closer to God.
That's great. Thank you. I think you have helped us to situate this idea of zikr within the spectrum of prayers that we have within the tradition, and this idea of signs of God, the ayat, and how this is another reminder to the remembrance and to the God itself. And then this idea of how the beautiful names of God, Asma al-Husna, is another way of connecting and connection, in that way to work around with. I was wondering if you can share some of the examples of remembrance from the devotional literature that we have, and how some of this feature out in that realm.
Yeah. So I think it's in all our devotional literatures, and actually I think not just Ismaili but in Muslim literatures in general, you have these these poetic compositions that talk about this theme of remembrance and forget. They're all more or less around this theme. So let me give you a couple of examples from the Gnan tradition. I'll give you two. One is this Gnan that I'm sure everyone's familiar with, Kesari sarup bhulayo. And it's a Ghanaic verse which talks about a lion that's forgotten its lionish forms in the company of goats, that it hangs around with the goats and then thinks itself to be a goat.
Kesari sinh sarup bhulayo aja kere sang aja hoi rahiyo aise भरम में जीव को बुलायो भरम सब छोड़ी भाई अली अली करना है भी अली ने होए से भी अली ऐसा वचन तमें दिल माए धरना ऐसा वचन तमें दिल माए धरना भरम सब छोड़ी भाई अली अली करना.
And this verse is actually, it's drawing a parallel between that and the human condition, that we human beings are the ultimate of God. They are God's creation, but we've forgotten where we come from. We've forgotten our true identity. And by forgetting our true identity, we have lost touch with reality. What is reality? And reality is, of course, God. There's only one reality. And people have to stay connected with that reality. Very often people say that somebody who's crazy is somebody who is out of touch with reality. And what this Gnan is actually telling you is actually wake up from this delusion that you have, wake up from this, this contact with reality, wake up from the negligence, rekindle this contact with reality, the real, the haq, which God is called, and set aside all these delusions and then start focusing on the name. And of course, so that's a very powerful example, I think, of where you see this theme in the Gnan. Another very interesting verse of Gnan that comes to mind is this Gnan Sarga Bhavanti.
Iji Sarag bhavan thi maati mangaai bhai mitari mangaai साया मिली करी गाठ घड़ाया जीरे मुख के मंडल धोए दीवरा जगाया भाई दीवरा जगाया घट अंदर शब्द सुनाया जी रे हम पर दे सी दूर थी आया भाई दूरज चलना अल्लाह की यारे जानो मौला की यारे जानो की या हो शेख जीरे केणे पैरे साहिब मारो ले खालिशे खालक गुणा बख्शे.
So it's talking about the moment of creation, and it's saying that God ordered, all the clay to be brought in His presence, and then with this clay, He shapes the human, and He shapes the face of the human, and then He lights 2 candles for the eyes, and then it talks about then He breathed the word, His word, into the heart of this thing that He had created. Now, this is, of course, it's all symbolic language. Many of these Ghanaic ideas have to be understood as in the forms of allegories, parables, however, they're rich. But it's interesting in the very act of creation, as it's being described in this particular Ghanan, what brings life to this thing that God created is the word, again, the name, the word that He recites and puts into the heart of this creature. And it is that word, that special spark that is within us that we have forgotten, because we have a spark of the divine within us. So that's what this is saying. But we are negligent that we are actually bearers of the divine spark. And so what this Ghanan is doing is it reminds you that in the very act of creation, we have this very special relationship with God, which unfortunately in the process of creation, we've forgotten this link. But this God that we are searching for, that we are trying to remember, is not a distant God. This God is within us. So really the journey to remembrance is internal. And that's why in a certain way, zikr is also a journey of self-transformation, because the journey is within yourself, transforming yourself so that you become more God-conscious, you become less egocentric, and then you can connect with the spark that's within you. And that's it also reminds me, of course, of this very famous hadith of the Prophet that many you find in many Islamic compositions that where God says that the heavens and the earth cannot contain me, but the heart of the believer does. So here again, you have this sense that we have actually forgotten to connect with the reality that is within us. And, and as I said, from a perspective of, what's real and what's not real, how crazy it is not to be in connection with reality.
I think this is very interesting because so many devotional pieces that we recite, that we have grown up with, sometimes when we reflect on that, they are in themselves reminders of some kind of an inner transformation and journey that we have to embark on, or it encourages us to embark on in that way.
Yeah.
Professor Asani, my last question to you would be about the Khushali Ginan. And if you can speak something about what themes come across out of that, and if there is anything that we can take as an inspiration from that.
Okay, so first I wanted to say a little bit about this, the function of devotional literatures that we were talking about, and that I would say that this devotional literatures, if you think about what is the overall purpose behind this devotional poetry that we recite in our, whether it's the Qasida or it's the Ginans or it's the Mankaba, whatever we recite, it is a reminder. It is to remind us. It is to try to ground us in reality, to awaken us from what is called the sleep of negligence, Habe Ghaflat, as it's called. So that actually is a theme. You could say that even though we have these diverse devotional traditions in different languages and written in different points in time, and I would also include, modern day compositions that Ismailis are composing, in praise of the Imams and so on. It's all under this whole category of remembrance and connecting with the real. So that, I think, is an interesting sort of observation about the nature and the function of devotional literatures. In terms of the, since there is we are going to be celebrating the Salgira of our Hazar Imam on December 13th. So we usually, on that occasion, we sing this Ginan, Dhana Dhana Ajno Dararo, that this is a very auspicious day, and it's an auspicious day because we have, in a way, it says that we have found or we have recognized the connection with the Lord.
Eji dhana dhana a jano daadlore ame alivar pa yaji char jugana kas mala paap jataryaji he tano mera varore apna satgurasu ki je bhai manano mera varore apna baragurasu ki je bhai dutaro संसार पर ले छोड़ी मुकी जे बैठ गारो संसार शाहजी ने नामे करी जिए संसारे भला शुक्रम काम कीजिए.
And so it talks about this, that this is an auspicious. What does it mean that we have found the Lord, right? Again, we've connected with the Lord. We've connected with the Lord whom we had forgotten. And you can interpret as many of these verses. There are multiple ways you can interpret. Is an idiom that's used for the mystical experience or a mystical union, and that experience, this Gnostic verse, that experience of connecting with the Lord has purified you of all the impurities and egotistical desires. So this experience has been very transformative for the person. So the person who's had this experience has been purified, and that this person, and then the line goes on, the verse goes on to talk about that we are gathered in this assembly of love with the true guide, the Satguru. Here, I guess a reference to the Imam, that it's through the Imam that we've had this blessing of the union, the blessing of this experience. So we are here in gathering in love for the true guide, and that then the verse goes on to talk about how this world, this physical and material world, is very deceitful. It's a delusion, and it cautions listeners that, you know, only the name of the Lord, again going back to this idea of the name, only the name of this Lord will help you survive and in a way get your salvation from this deceitful, delusionary world. And then it ends with, and so given that this name will grant you salvation, it's also important that you should therefore do good deeds in this world. So that's how that verse ends up. But it has, in an interesting way, a connection with some of these themes that we were talking about, because this is actually a moment when actually forgetfulness has been banished. And we are joyous because we've returned to that state of origin. So, you know, there's this very important idea that you find in the Quran that there was a period in primordial times, or an event in primordial times, when God said to the uncreated creation, Alastu bi Rabbikum, am I not your Lord? And the uncreated creation said, Bala Shahidna. And that event has often been seen by mystics in the Islamic tradition as the beginning of a covenant, an agreement. And of course, with creation, the human soul has forgotten its connection with God. And so part of our journey in this world is to come back to remembering God. And when you go back to the moment that you are, after being separated from God, you're now one with God, which is what this Gnan is actually talking about, that you found the Lord, you found the object of your journey, is actually a moment of great joy, because you've returned to the origin, as it were. You know, the circle has been completed. That through this deceitful world, you've made this journey from forgetfulness to remembrance to union.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Asani, for taking us through this journey where we had talked about this idea of connection, the signs of God, remembrance, the importance of that word and that experience, human experience that is part of the wider faith traditions. And I hope during these difficult times, this conversation with you will be a source of hope, happiness, and strength, and reminder for an inner journey for all of us who are listening today. Once again, on behalf of our ITREB team, we thank you for taking time out today for us.
Thank you for asking me to share my thoughts on this topic, and I do want to take this occasion to wish all the viewers, the Jamaat in the UK jurisdiction or all around the world, because nowadays in Zoomistan we don't have actually territories, everybody's everywhere. Wishing all the Ismailis around the world, whoever's watching this program, a Salgira Mubarak.
Thank you, and Yalimadat.